Hello, Earthlings, fellow Earthlings. It is I. I am the GP. Oh! So I've been moving pine straw. Pine straw. It is that's what we call it in Alabama, and it comes from the pine tree. The pine tree produces pine needles. And what's interesting about pine straw is that when it rains and it moves and the water moves across the ground, the pine straw will slow down the water so that it doesn't carry away the dirt, the sediment, the wood chips. And so I've been doing that. And while I'm doing it, I've been smelling the earth. And so I go through the woods and I pick up sticks, collect those sticks into piles for a fire, which could happen once it gets colder. And then I take this little hand rake. It's 3 prongs on it, and I scrape the pine straw and I put it in. I carry 2 5-gallon buckets. I put some pine straw in one 5-gallon bucket and the other. And then I haul it over to the place where, water is eroding the dirt and pushing the dirt into the tributaries, which travels into the bodies of water and changes the water level. So erosion control, pretty good. And then as you move the pine straw, you can notice fungus and bugs. Also, I got a little bit of poison ivy. And so, pine straw. What I noticed while doing the pine straw is that the mind will wander. And I kind of get upset because I want to notice the smell of the soil and notice the sound of the birds and the feeling of the breeze. And what it seems to me is that the mind is the source of all of this. Like, without the mind, what would life be like without the mind? So I wonder if how much the mind plays into our inability to have peace. So as individuals, our minds can just do all kinds of things. We can have all kinds of feelings and thoughts. And so when the mind is in control of the body, and it seems like there isn't a lot of agency, like our ability to consider our options and make an informed decision can be absent. And I've done it where I don't practice patience. And sometimes we don't have time for patience, but often we do. And so, is there agency? How much agency do we have? This is where I mentioned the theoretical, futuristic technology which can measure the mind, right? And so we could potentially measure the mind and figure out how much agency a person has. How much is a person being gripped by the mind and considering possible options before proceeding with some decision. And so, based on my experience, I know that humans can basically be very predictable and have no agency for periods of time, where the human is just like a robot. Maybe that's where the acronym NPC is used to describe some people. And so there is a state of mind which has no freedom, and there is a state of mind which can receive revelations outside the path which would have been taken if there had not been this practice of being patient and considering and reconsidering. And I noticed it's really important. I've never really recognized how important it is to distinguish between what is and what ought to be. And so when you consume content on the internet, when you have thoughts, when the mind does its thing because it's feeding off of content, off of data sources, streams, hello. Does anybody want to chat? Let me share. I definitely need help creating peace on earth. So if you want to help, feel free to join. And so when the mind does its thing, oftentimes it's related to what is relative to some notion of what ought to be. And the ought is connected to our goals. So what ought to be on the internet? What ought to be the content that we are consuming? And it just depends. It depends on each individual and where they are at along their path in space and time. It's like we can't, I can't produce content which is going to be received by everyone in a way which is beneficial. That's the problem with creating content for the world, whether it's a book, whether it's a movie, whether it's a piece of art, music. I mean, we can have fun when we do it, and having fun is important. So what ought we to do? Philip says, hi, at work, can't talk. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. I have plenty of thoughts. And who is I? Who is I? The mind, which has thoughts, is just this collection of experiences of comforts and discomforts, rewards and punishments throughout time and space. Developing an identity might also be called an ego, some sense of self, and developing some view of the world. And other people are part of that world. So that's what the you is. That's what the mind is. And but is the mind I? Is like if we take time to reconsider, and if we're patient in our choices about what action to take next and what direction should we be aiming, yeah, I don't know if that's the same thing as the mind. So the mind, I heard Alan Watts inside of a. I could try to play the song. Maybe we wouldn't get a strike. But basically, Alan Watts in this song has one phrase. It says, "The mind is a good servant, but a bad master." Or maybe it goes the other way around. The mind is a bad master, but a good servant. And yeah, so when I'm going to open my window so I can see the nature. There we go. I don't know if you guys could see that or what. It'd be cool if I grabbed the camera and had the camera pointed out at what I could see. It'd be nice. Instead of you looking at this ugly mug, this face, you'd have some nature, because this is way more pretty. Hopefully you just have some audio in your ear if you're listening. And then I think what I've learned recently is sometimes we just need to take the content out, and we need to be able to experience the smells and the sounds and all the sensations on the skin without the mind gripping us, because we're missing something. When the mind begins to focus on anything, we do not have the same experience that we could have if the mind had no thoughts. I don't know if you guys know what that feels like, to have no thoughts. I know my personal problem is that I just have thoughts all the time. My mind has been thinking for decades, probably most of my life, including in my dreams. So I'm trying to learn to be able to not to be free from the mind, because I think some people in this corner like to believe that in God and the Creator. And so I think when the mind is active, just going through the thoughts, I think that it causes us to, when the mind is the master, the Creator is not the master. And so when we can attempt to allow the mind to be a servant, which allows us to reconsider what we're aiming at, and reconsider our choices in order to have better success and less error, and better error rates and success rates at accomplishing our goals. When we reconsider, we can then attempt to be in service to the highest power. And obviously, that's a God of our own understanding. The best I've got so far is that force which permeates all of existence, which created existence and maintains existence, which is what is studied, by people making observations and documenting what is being observed. We're basically studying some part of the creative force which permeates everything when we do that. And it's very good, as it said in Genesis 1. As a whole, it's very good. And so when the mind, when I'm just like, it's like the mind can have a relationship with itself whenever it's trying to be of service, and it can have relationships with the world, including other people. And so when the mind is just having a relationship with itself, it's like we can ignore so much, just an infinite number of things. Like we'll become blind to that which gives us joy. And so I've lived a lot of my life without joy, which is funny to say because my mom died when I was 2 years old, and her name was Joy. So I think that's kind of a funny play on words, or maybe funny is the wrong word, but it's strange. Yeah, so that 2-year-old version of myself had a mind that ended up adjusting to a situation, and it's a part of me. This mind. Yeah, the way that the path to joy, to experiencing joy, has something to do with playing. I spoke with Tayo the other day. We recorded it. We might release it somewhere, but we don't have to. And I asked what is a friend, and he said something like, a friend is someone who, it's something like share values or find value in each other. And that was kind of a general response. And then the thought occurred to me is that, I had a lot of friends, and I think we were friends because we played together. And so it was a very simple definition of the word friend. And so there's different kinds of play. And there are kinds of play which bring about joy. And then there's kinds of play which is very serious. And I did a lot of that, a lot of serious play, getting upset with people for not taking it so seriously. And so mind-altering substances, what are mind-altering substances? So music can do it. That's the most, especially for the religious folks who listen to these sometimes, it's, I think their skin might prickle. Some of the religious folks' skin might prickle about this phrase, mind-altering substances. But maybe a better phrase is mind-altering experiences. But music can do that. And so it basically allows for that mind, which is relating to itself in such a way that it is blind to things. The mind-altering experience simply facilitates the mind being exposed to new experiences. It's a revelation. And so there are minds that have those experiences. Like every mind has blind spots. Every mind has blind spots. And a revelation is simply the revealing of what was previously in a blind spot. And so mind-altering experiences are something like that. We suddenly, or maybe not so suddenly, and maybe it's a remembering of something that's in a blind spot. Tayo, howdy. Yeah, I enjoyed that conversation we had, Tayo. And so we'll develop habits and routines. The mind will develop habits and routines. And so there will be things which are in our blind spots. So you got blind spot. One way to think about it is when you're driving a car and you turn to look over your shoulder, you could have obstructions, wherever the metal is at, you can't see everything, even when you turn your head. And then also you have a field of view. So we have blind spots, and we develop blind spots throughout our life. The mind develops blind spots. And we can even have minds, and this is the one that's gotten me, is the mind can become blind to its own shortcoming. Like the mind can actually trick itself into believing that it's not blind, that it somehow doesn't have blind spots, or that's where the arrogance comes from. The arrogance, confidence in it. It just happens because it happens when you set goals and then have success and a high success rate, and then you can even see it objectively in comparison to everyone else, attempting to accomplish similar goals. So, yeah, when you do that and have lots of success, you then can become someone who's condescending and generally condescending, and it's a bad habit. Because you could be one of the most successful people in the world, but you don't experience joy. And it's because maybe you take life too seriously. Maybe you are feeding on the things which are comfortable, and you're avoiding uncomfortable experiences. And you haven't learned that uncomfortable experiences can be quite revelatory. And so you can be someone who is condescending to the world, meanwhile being one of the most miserable souls in the world at the same time. I think it's a little bit funny. It's kind of fitting. But I hope that this content is improving lives. Like I said earlier, it's hard to create content which is good for everyone. One of the blind spots that plague many minds is the worship of words. And so a word has a definition, and you can give authority to Merriam-Webster, for example. And so then you can connect to some point of authority and then assume everyone else should respect that authority. But that's just one source of authority, Merriam-Webster. You might have other sources of authority. Maybe it's an institution, and there's a lot of those. And so when you worship words and worship authorities on earth, and other people use words in unfamiliar ways that are different from the way words are used by the authorities that you treat as sacred and worship, then there's just an inability to actually communicate. It can be like the mind can become blind to what the other person is trying to say when they use words in strange ways, in unfamiliar ways. And it's ultimately, it goes back to like, what should we be aiming at? And so you have to reconsider what you're aiming at. And so a lot of those people are aiming at, they tell themselves that they're aiming at truth. And then they define truth as this thing that is connected to some authority which they worship and treat as sacred. But that's different. Like if that's your highest in the hierarchy, that's different than upholding love as the highest. Because when you uphold love as the highest, as above truth, for example, because it's, then you can attempt to love your enemy, the person who's using words the wrong way. And then you can learn what they are thinking in their mind, what they are trying to say. Philip, how much of the way we think derive from survival strategies formed during childhood? Yeah, that's what I was pointing out about my mom dying when I was 2. In order to cope, I think there was a thought, and maybe thoughts for a long period of time, about what did I do to make my mom go away? And that's sad. And if your mom isn't coming back and never comes back, what are the coping strategies? So you call it survival strategies. So there's a coping strategy there. So I can talk about my personal experience with that. And I think we probably each as individuals can look at our lives and understand ourselves better and understand, what might be called the shadow. So I've said before that I don't care about people's feelings as much as my wife. This is the best way to language that idea. And I think it had something to do with becoming someone who stopped caring about my own feelings and becoming goal-oriented and attempting to learn quickly in order to try and be the best I can be. And I think that's coupled to, my mom died when I was 2. So you can imagine that this mind changed into a mind that stopped caring about its own feelings, and by extension, stopped caring about others' feelings, and then wanted to be someone who would be liked, so that people would not want to go away, and would want to be like the best, so that people would want to be with me, this mind. And so that turned me into, I became someone who is me, or I had a mind that formed that way. And so the way we think is pretty deep, because it's even more than the way we think. It's also the way we feel, and it's even subconscious. Like, I don't consciously choose to ignore my feelings and ignore other people's feelings. It's something that I think it was a coping mechanism for the situation I was in. And then I have to practice love, practice loving. I have to practice humility because all that seed ended up causing me to be someone who had a lot of success, um, more success than most people, and observing that and becoming a condescending, arrogant asshole, right? Because that's like to me, that's by definition, like, and it was subconscious. It's not like I chose to be a condescending, arrogant asshole. It's that my mom dying when I was 2 led to me becoming a condescending, arrogant asshole. That's just, the way to say it. You can language that as, oh, these are Gavin's weaknesses, but then you can also language it up with pointing at Gavin's strengths, because they go together. Philip, is there a cold observer part of the mind? It's hard to do for me, but because I'm condescending, I'm tempted to think that I do it better than most people, but it's still hard. But all I can say is what I've experienced. And I can point at other people who have taught similar things. For example, Mooji, Mooji. And if you want to look up Mooji, you can look up the third bird. He talks about the birds in the tree. And so you can have one bird that's going about its day, creating a nest and going and doing its work to create the nest, and, laying eggs, and the eggs hatch, and then it has to go feed the bird. And there can be a second bird that's up in the tree, and it can see that first bird coming and going. And so that's what comes to mind about the cold observer, is just, it's like the watcher of the feelings and thoughts. So yeah, I think that can be done, and it's a practice, and it can help with reconsidering and things like that. Like, it tends to be that's the way. It's probably some stage of development that we would want minds to reach, and it's not how we were born. So we can begin to have like a self-reflection skill. We can learn a self-reflection skill, and this might be one of those skills that are like more important than everything that's taught in public schools. And then Mooji takes it to the third bird, I think. Well, what's watching the second bird that's watching the first bird? Cold observer part of the mind. What's really hard, and I've practiced requesting feedback from people, and this is what Tayo and I talked about, and he said that he thinks that's what I've been bringing to the corner, is it's trying to encourage people to be willing and able to receive feedback and critical feedback. But yeah, when the mind receives feedback, which is, I could say accusatory, for example, accusational, is the mind can become defensive. And so that's one way to practice going into the place of the cold observer, as you put it, is being able to, it's hard, or at least it's been hard for me, as a condescending, arrogant asshole previously. Hopefully, I think that's gotten better over time. And this practice of being willing and able to receive critical feedback from people has allowed me to then practice trying to integrate these things. I like to imagine that I like to imagine this technology which can monitor the mind. Like I have a Fitbit, which can monitor my heart rate, which is at 70. I've done 3,317 steps. I've burned 1,083 calories. Um, I think we will be able to monitor the mind, and we will be able to monitor states of mind as they change, such that we could even monitor this cold observer, monitor the ability to receive feedback, the ability essentially to love our enemy. And that's a hypothetical technology that should be coming, probably using artificial intelligence. Can be used for good or bad, like all tools. But in thinking about that, you can begin to maybe aim at keeping track of your own mind in the same way that some technology would. And so if you were wearing that technology, so this is like a thought experiment. And so you could imagine wearing a device that tracks the same way this Fitbit tracks my sleep and tracks my heart rate. This device could track your mind. And so just becoming interested in, I see some kind of an attack happening out in the water. I have binoculars, I think. Where are my binoculars? What is that? It's not a human. If it was a human, I'd be more nervous about an attack out in the water. I think it was a giant fish. Rolling around on the surface of the water. But yeah, tracking the mind is something like that's self-reflection, self-awareness. Developing that skill is important. And the one I'm not good at is social awareness. And that's because of what I experienced throughout life, including my mom dying when I was 2. And being raised by people who experience their own set of things as well, good and bad. And who decides what's good and bad? Philip, first time seeing you. When did you get to the corner? Enjoying your thoughts. We'll keep an eye out for you from now on. That's nice, Philip. Yeah, I'm comparing, like immediately just comparing that to how my mind works. But yeah, I appreciate that. That's nice. So I talked to Tayo about this, and he asked me these kinds of questions. And the thing that sticks out to me that I'd point out is I felt like Grimgriz was he was the most inviting. He was like the first to invite and most inviting whenever I got into the Bridges of Meaning Discord server. And so that happened. And Grimgriz and I have cultivated some kind of a amicable relationship, friendly relationship. We play together, to use that definition of that word friend I mentioned earlier, where we can play. But yeah, I went into the Bridges of Meaning Discord server because I was subscribed to Paul Vanderklay, and I saw that he had a link to the Discord server, and I had learned that error correction was good. So receiving feedback from people is very important. So like I titled this stream, it has something to do with peace on earth. And at one point I said, we need to be able to receive feedback from other people, and other people's inputs, their perspectives are valuable. It's not, I was over 30 years old before I figured that one out. And so, yeah, I was attracted to that. I noticed that Paul was doing something like that, and most people weren't. Most people were not, open to receiving feedback from others. And I'm not saying Paul is doing it as well as I would like to see people doing it, but he's doing it better, right? This is the is-ought. I think Paul is doing it better than most. And how should we do it is a different question. Grimm's a good man. Yeah, he seems that way. And that's the thing on the internet, though, is how this I've only learned this one in the last few weeks, is how important it is to get off the internet and actually be good away from the internet, because the internet, this is the place for the mind. It's hard to embody. You can't fully embody on the internet, and so, but yeah, I get the sense that Grimm's a good man, because there is things that you can do on the internet, and like trying to be inviting, trying to connect with people who are virtually alone, so that they're no longer virtually alone. They can at least be virtually not alone. And then we can learn to actually, there's the basics of love. Like, we can practice being love and loving on the internet. We can actually do that. And it's important to do that practice. But if we just do it on the internet, then I don't think it's good enough. That's definitely not good enough for peace on earth, right? You actually have to be love on and off the internet, with some good balance, playing some good balancing games. But yeah, I subscribed to Paul VanderKlay because I had subscribed to Jordan Peterson, being a software engineer who just worked by myself for years, listening to podcasts and YouTube, and came across Jordan Peterson and listened to tens of hours, if not over 100 hours of Jordan Peterson. So then that's how Paul VanderKlay ended up in my feed, and why I ended up on the Bridges of Meaning Discord server, and why I'm here today, hopefully. And I've learned things along the way. So, like, I'm not the same person I was when I first showed up. So my rate of error correction is better than it was when I first showed up. Yeah, so I came into the corner wanting to, being very naive and wanting to meet with the people who are righteous and who want to create peace on earth, and thinking myself to be righteous, and that's just that arrogant, that condescending, arrogant asshole, that's always going to be there in the mind. And if the mind is the master, then I'll do things that are just like that, and people rightfully so, don't really want to be around that. But I mean, I think I'm still interested in peace on earth, and I do think we need to be able to receive feedback. We need to be able to do error correction. We need to figure out what we ought to be doing, and we need to know what is. These are some of the basics. And there has to be some balancing of these things. Like, if we just hyper focus on what is and never pay attention to selecting those who figure out what ought to be, that won't work out very well. And if we're just being love on the internet, but not in our, not outside the internet with other people in our space time, that won't work either. And so I'll share an invite link again in case other people want to help create peace on earth. So I mentioned this to Tayo, and the first thing I do when I connect, there's a few things about peace on earth. Like, it only takes one person to ruin the peace. So that's how like I think that's how realistic you have to be about it. That's why it probably won't happen for 1,000 years. Um, but yeah, this is where speaking about these things on the internet is probably not the best because, you know, you definitely want to know how to clean your room before you try to figure out how to do peace on earth. But I mean, here's the bragging part of me, which I have to be careful about. Is it's like I'm living in a lake house with a wife and children, and I wanted to do that 20 years ago. And so I do know how to set goals, long-term goals for the future and accomplish them. So I'm not one of those internet people who can't clean their own room. I have had success, but yeah, we don't want to encourage people to, what is it called? Overreach. Yeah, we don't want people to overreach and try to do more than what each person is ready to do. And that's probably when peace on earth happens is, it happens slowly, right? As people are ready, as enough people learn to clean their room and set goals. Jordan Peterson talked about the self-authoring program, and you set a goal for 5 years, but you do eventually need to be able to set goals for 20 years and 50 years, some basic goals. This is an interesting, so is it Bub Elvis or is it Bub Elvis? Bubble this? I kind of like this name. How about now human extreme suffering on earth to start with? So to start with would be like, I mean, we can start with our room, right? There's so many problems we will experience. Yeah, he said no. How about no human extreme suffering on earth to start with? It's bubblefish. Bubblefish. Cool. It's good to know. Bubblefish. No human extreme suffering on earth to start with. That's not where I start, but I'm not saying I'm right. Saying that's the key there. I think that's key right there. Like when we think we have the answer and that we're right and everyone else is wrong, like you can't have peace on earth at that point. Hey, Andrew. Nice corgi. But yeah, extreme suffering on earth. Like you don't want to overreach and you don't want to become overwhelmed. And so you kind of deal with the mess that's right there where you're at. And to be honest, I relocated from a neighborhood where, I had a neighbor that was making loud noises, and my wife confronted her, and it did the interaction did not seem to go well. And so we had two houses. So we said, we're just going to go to the house that has the better neighbors. And so, yeah, that's a question for me. And you can see where I lean. It's like when you fight, flight, or freeze. So there's questions of when do you fight, when do you flight, and when do you freeze? And so you can talk about what ought to be. Yeah, there ought not be extreme suffering on earth. And another way I'd phrase that is we would like to avoid permanent damage. So like as a father, I want to avoid permanent damage. I want to, hopefully I can provide an opportunity for my children to learn and grow and have more responsibilities and freedoms while experiencing challenges and being uncomfortable and experiencing pain and suffering without them having any long-term damage. I mean, it's obvious when it's like physical. maybe it's not so obvious when you think about psychological damage, and is it even damage? Like my mom died when I was 2. Was that long-term psychological damage? Maybe. So I think we want to get there. I think the path includes, I think it includes flight. That's I have tended to be someone who will avoid the situations in which there is likely to be violence, right? And so, yeah, the question would be, can you do it without violence? So I think it would be nice. Like I could get down and do some push-ups right now. Maybe I'll do that. Let's see. Do some push-ups. So it's nice to be ready for violence. Like it'd be nice if we learned jujitsu. It'd be nice to be able to learn how to use a firearm. Yeah. But ideally, you would never use your firearm. And you would never use your jujitsu. I like these slow push-ups. You go down and just hold it. So like, it's not about hitting your number. This isn't the way I'm doing push-ups, and maybe I'm doing them wrong, but it's about having good form, trying to avoid pain. But like you don't want too much pain. You do want some pain. And there's different kinds of pain. Pops, I'm 38 years old, people. I watched the strongest grip strength in the world is this guy who, and maybe it was advertising, but he's like in his 70s. He did a video with Magnus Mitbo, who is he was a rock climber, and that's my weak point right there, my left shoulder. I injured it. Fight, flight, freeze. I see everybody doing pretend fighting, like maybe pretend and not so pretend, but a lot of people doing pretend fighting, like, and essentially it's a freeze, just pretending to be a fight, but I think that people should be willing to gather together and create new cities. I'll get to you, Dr. Kostub-Wag. Bubblefish, peace on earth. Well, let me finish your previous one. Let's see. I was thinking about that. It should start with something simple that most countries could agree with, like clean drinking water, maybe. Clean drinking water would be good. The thing is, the reason I said flight and we create new cities is because I don't think we've figured out how to select the best decision makers. And that's true for everyone. Like, nobody watching this video has figured out how to select the best decision makers. We haven't done that. We haven't figured out how to do that as individuals, and we haven't figured out how to do that as a society. And so that's kind of the task at hand. That's my opinion. I might be wrong. But clean drinking water is a good aim. But the reason I focus on decision makers is because I don't trust the existing governments. I don't trust the existing countries, the existing systems. And so I think ultimately you have to have a conversation about who should be the decision makers. And then I connect that back to the earlier conversation about the mind and being able to allow your mind to become a servant to the highest power, and avoid having the mind to be a master which has no agency, which just acts without consideration or reconsideration. And then I kind of hope for a technology that will allow us to monitor the mind. And that's just one thought. So in order to provide clean water to the world, you have to organize effectively. And in order to organize effectively, you have to be able to figure out, who the decision makers should be. Who ought the decision makers be? And we haven't figured that out. And so I'm suggesting this bit about the mind and how the mind should relate with itself and with the world, and being able to monitor it. Peace on earth would involve subjugating all countries on earth, which could be more dangerous than the situation we have now. So that's not peace on earth, because that subjugation is that's coercion. There will be resistance. It only takes one person to ruin the peace, so it has to be voluntary. It's not going to happen in our lifetime. Like, you won't have peace on earth until everyone is voluntarily doing it. That's my thought. I think I'm right. The doctor. So we now optimizing tribal masculine urges using hive mind now? I'm not opposed to that. I'm not opposed to this, doctor. I'm not opposed to this. Now, what does that optimize? What does the optimized man look like? We might disagree there. I think we ought to figure it out. Bubblefish, meritocracy is a good word, but maybe that's the way it ought to be. But then there's going to be disagreement about what does it look like when it's instantiated. What does meritocracy actually look like? How do you recognize it when you see it? Answering that question kind of informs basically some tests that could be run in order to move closer to meritocracy. And I don't think we figured that out. These, I guess this corner, we've got John Vervaeke, for example. He's received a lot of education. And when you receive this education, I know that you learn what is. You learn something about what is. And then the question for me is, well, what ought to be? And so, where does John Vervaeke fit on deciding what ought to be? He definitely fits into having an awareness of what is, situational awareness, but where should he fit into the receiving of attention to decide what ought to be? I don't think we figured that out. Having meritocracy would depend on the attention and where it is being given and received in relationship to information about what is and what ought to be. Nathaniel, hello. So we could talk about what ought to be. I mean, that's kind of what I did, but I'm trying to focus on the broadest audience. Because, yeah, if you're, I've got a 3-year-old, 5-year-old, 7-year-old. And so each mind goes through development, and there's an order to the revelations which can be received, such that the mind's blind spots can be revealed in a certain order. So, speaking on the internet isn't I don't think that's the way to talk about all of what ought to be. But we could talk about the importance of figuring out what ought to be. And maybe some ideas about how we figure out what ought to be. Bubblefish. Bad decision makers could be discovered if they can't avoid debates about their decision making. Well, we can always flip that, because we have this tendency to scapegoat and point at others. And so this is where I encourage everyone to practice receiving critical feedback from others, experiencing the defensiveness which emerges when we receive critical feedback, attempting to receive revelation when we receive feedback, attempting to serve the highest power, maybe aiming at like the best goals. And so there's that. We can do it. Each one of us can do it. And then we can ask ourselves, well, who are we giving our attention to? When we watch a movie, we read a book, we watch YouTube videos, listen to podcasts, visit websites. And I ran tests reaching out to political parties, websites, academia, just people and organizations, just reaching out and essentially testing people's ability to receive feedback. And you'll find that we're actually terrible at it as a society on the internet, using the internet. The internet is such a powerful tool which allows us to receive feedback. And if you actually go start testing people, you'll see that it's hard, and there are reasons why it's hard. If everybody starts trying to connect with Paul VanderKlay, he's not going to be able to handle all of it. And so, yeah, we could talk about that. But Paul VanderKlay's doing better than most. That's what is. And then there's the what ought to be. Like, we really have to talk about how should people facilitate their own error correction, such that they can make better decisions, right? And so it's a hard problem that we haven't figured out. Philip, political thinker Eric Voegelin may be helpful to you. He is an incredible thinker. Now, so yeah, I'll tell you one weakness I have. Reading comprehension skills. For some reason, I will see things in the text that maybe that other people won't see, and maybe even see things that the author, and probably see things that the author didn't intend for me to see. So it helps. It's very helpful for me to actually speak with people so that people can correct my errors. And so, yeah, for example, if you think Eric is a thinker, which would be helpful, you would be able to point out Eric's thoughts. And if you say if your mind has an understanding of Eric's thoughts and Eric's mind, then you could be a representative of Eric, and then I could then ask you the questions. because of my, I have like this weakness when it comes to communication. Something I've been getting better at, but I'm not great at. Bubblefish. I vent my ideas in this chat, exposing them to your good mind to correct them. That's perfect, Bubblefish. That's the danger with the internet, though, is, you know, if this thing scaled up and there were 1,000 people doing all this and venting, you know, bad ideas, it would be harder for one person to address them. This is where it was interesting to learn about Jethro, Moses' father-in-law. Jethro, you know, Moses, I guess the story goes that Moses was trying to help with people's bad decisions, and it didn't scale well. And so Jethro, I think Jethro encouraged this organization such that when Moses made decisions, those decisions could be used as a reference for future decisions by Moses's representatives. And so you have something like Moses being a representative of the highest power, being able to handle nuance and new situations, and then making decisions which can then which serve as an example for others. The issue, like, I think that's perfect. We want to be able to find the people who are like Moses, who are have the best relationship with the highest power, who can make these kinds of decisions about all of the situations that we find ourselves in where we don't know what decisions to make. But it seems to me that we aren't seeking out the people who can make those decisions. We aren't trying to select for the people who are the best decision makers, who would be best at figuring out what ought to be. And then me, the thing that I can do is I can be tech support. Like, I think technology can help. So, for example, if Moses was here and Moses allowed me to be tech support, I could increase Moses to the world. Moses could be the decision maker for the entire world for all of these decisions that we face with all these new opportunities which technology bring to make bad decisions and good decisions with every new tool that's ever created. We've had so many tools created since the time of Moses and so many new opportunities to make bad decisions. It's a hard problem. Doctor. Answer. Ask any narcissist. Since they don't have adult responsibilities, adult individualized inner monologue, they can even guess most accurately the answers. No one don't even know. I'm trying to understand what you're saying. I'm not sure what you're trying to say. This might be where I have bad reading comprehension skills. Yeah, I'm not sure your point. I'm not sure what you're pointing at. They intrinsically average out the mean answer. That is usually the most correct, but they can't really act individually as an adult. I mean, I kind of resonate with this idea of acting individually as an adult. I've noticed that I do better with teams. But yeah, I'm not, I probably could push back on a lot of this if I really understood what you're saying. But yeah, I don't fully understand what your point is about the narcissist. I think it's probably connected to what you said earlier. The narcissist and tribal masculine urges being optimized. There's some assumptions about what a narcissist is and what are adult responsibilities. I don't know what you mean by that. And I don't know like what the example of what is the most correct answer that a narcissist would know. And then I don't know the difference between knowing an answer and acting. I guess that's where you're saying there are people who know the answer. I guess you're trying to say that there are answers that most people know the answer to or the right answer to, but even though they know the answer, they don't act it out correctly. I think that's what you're trying to say. You see how long that took me to get to a possible interpretation of what you said? Like, my mind is weird and it requires, I have to think slowly, or I do think slowly. My mind can handle things that other people's minds can't handle, and it has a hard time handling things that some people's minds can handle. The only thing I'd push back, if my interpretation of all this was correct, the interpretation being that many people know what's right, know the answer, but people then have a hard time acting out what is right, even though they know it's right. I think it's a good point. Yeah, it's just, I'd love an example of what is right, which people don't act out. But yeah, I think it's a good point, and I think like in order to have peace on earth, it's going to require that we learn how to become better parents, better neighbors, better employees, because this mind was shaped by all of that: parenting, education systems, government systems, neighbors, and so it all has to get better such that the mind that knows the answer and can't do it, that kind of mind, the number of minds like that decrease over time. It's slow, very slow processes, takes generations. Voigelin View on YouTube will help. I'll search that in my tab so that I remember. Voigelin. Oops, typo. Oh, Voigelin View. I got you. 484 subscribers. Voigelin View. I'll just subscribe to it. Thank you for the pointing. We'll see if it helps. Bubblefish. I imagine Moses to be Elon Musk. Elon Musk has not figured out how to receive feedback. It's the same issue, but you have to become someone who's interested. First, you have to be someone who knows that other people have perspectives that are valuable and that you have blind spots, that your mind has blind spots that other people can see, which if the mind were to receive those revelations, there would be an increase in success rates, better error rates, better success rates. Things would improve. You have to become someone like that first. And I don't think he's there yet, because if he was there, he would have tried to solve this problem. I don't think he's tried to solve this problem just because he's not aware of the problem. Like, I've called it the human resource problem. It's a problem nobody thinks we have. You have to actually become someone who values humans, values other humans, and is not being condescending. And it's a hard move for very successful people to do. The more successful you are, the the higher chance you are of being a condescending, arrogant asshole. Like I've been, and I'm working on my condescending, arrogant asshole nature, and I've had a lot of success. I'm just saying that, and Elon Musk has had more than me. It's just a trap that these kinds of minds fall into. So in some way, your success can be a curse. I vicariously lived the tribal life when I watched the Turkish historical TV drama series Dirilis Ertugrul. It's about the father of Osama. Osman started the Ottoman Empire. Ertugrul lived the tribe life. These tribes were nomads raising goats. That's interesting. Raising goats. Doctor, we have an epidemic of narcissist NPCs. Not enough mistakes done by real adult men. Mistakes can be corrected by the next generation. Yeah, I think we're on the same page. Yes. I mean, that's why you can fight, flight, freeze, and I am. My nature has been to flee. I've learned to try to not be so impulsive in my fleeing, but yeah, my instinct is to flee, to avoid fighting, and so yeah, I lean toward a kind of reconsideration, which looks like freeze, and an invitation and encouraging to flee together. Like we want to flee together into cities where we can learn how to live in peace and be productive. And it's because I think there's no example. There's no like city on the hill towards which we can look and learn the right way of being. We don't have those. Red Trek. Just to add some context, not sure if it's helpful or not, narcissist personality disorder involves people pathologically defending against the possibility of being wrong or inferior. I mean, I struggled with this my entire life. So it has been a very difficult task in becoming someone who can receive criticism. Like, I even become aggravated when people aren't seeing what I'm seeing. I had it the other day. I explained a solution. The other person didn't receive it. And I become aggravated by it. And I had to mouth the right language and say, do you disagree with what I said? Can you help me to learn why I'm wrong? And it's tough to say things like this if you're narcissistic. There's narcissistic tendencies, but I mean, if you look deeply, though, are you someone who can receive critical feedback about that which you hold dearly? It's hard, and I know we have different minds, different kinds of minds. So maybe there's some people who don't struggle as much with this, but if you're aware of people who don't struggle with having their core axioms poked, send them my way. Like, I'm actually very good at playing the devil's advocate. And I might not be able to do it publicly because I can play the devil's advocate in ways where I even will say things that the majority of people would disagree with. And if you do that on the internet, you could get fired, right? Even if you are playing a role, there's some things you just don't say. Season with English subs is on YouTube in a playlist. Okay. I guess I can look that up. It's called, I wish I could copy and paste the text that's in the chat and StreamYard. Dirilis Ertugrul. Dirilis Ertugrul. Yeah. Interesting. I'll pull up the Wikipedia page for now. Yeah, I think you're right. The narcissists are limited in how, instead of saying they, I tend to say we engage with others in the world and the world. I think the key for a narcissist though is to a narcissist has to aim at like very difficult goals. And then when the narcissist tries to accomplish a very difficult goal by themselves, they will fail. They'll make mistakes, right? And so I think I think the narcissist who's like the perpetual narcissist, just they haven't learned to aim properly. They're just aiming at goals for the day or goals for the week. They maybe aren't aiming at the goal for the year or the goal for 5 years. And yeah, that's my suspicion. At least that was true for me. Once I started trying to aim for, like, for example, for peace on earth, then I started to see, oh, my narcissistic tendencies will prevent peace on earth. Right. So my inability to do error correction will prevent peace on earth. My inability to care about other people's feelings will prevent peace on earth. My inability to communicate will prevent peace on earth. So there's, you just depends on what you're aiming at. Like the most narcissistic thing to do is to think that you can help create peace on earth. And so, yeah, I would encourage narcissists to consider that one. And then it's going to be hard. If you really are serious about it and doing that for your entire life, it's a hard ride. It's because you're basically going to learn that you're a bit of a monster. That's part of the reason that we can't do it. And that's kind of like what each of us have to do, is we have to transform ourselves into the kinds of people who could be, in paradise, for example. That's a hard, because parts of you are going to be revealed that you were blind to, that you didn't want to see. Philip, like Peterson before Peterson. I'm not sure what you mean by like Peterson before Peterson. It might be out of context. Hello, Bazami. I'm going to I like to do lunch with the family on Wednesdays, so I will be going to do that soon. If you missed the beginning of this, I talked about pine straw and the importance of smelling. While moving the pine straw, was smelling the earth and the fungus, and listening to the birds and feeling, the temperature and the movement of the air on my skin. I don't know how important all that is, but I think we can become trapped by our own mind, and noticing everything happening right now, like away from the screen, being able to go outside and notice it and just kind of experience it without the mind trying to interpret everything and the mind having conversations with itself. Being able to do that is, I think, healthy. Yeah. Pretty soon I will be going to lunch. Feeling alive. Yeah. It's when you're like, I've been trapped by my own mind for so long, that for long, long periods of time, that, yeah, it's the experience is very different when you are just in, like, getting out in nature and experiencing it without without the mind, like without the mind which chatters and thinks. Touching grass. But yeah, I mean, even mud. I don't know if you've ever hopped in the mud, and it has a smell and it gets everywhere. If you've ever gotten like fully covered in mud, it can be really fun. What's interesting, maybe we can leave on this note, is a lot of times we'll be of service. We'll do something that we want to do. We choose to do it. Like maybe we're making breakfast for others, or maybe we are cleaning an area. Maybe we're doing things, and then we can have the mind can then think all kinds of things like, this is my obligation, or this is a lot of work, and this is hard, or nobody's appreciating it, and the mind can do all kinds of things. But ultimately, like, you could be doing it, being of service, and enjoying it immensely. So it's interesting. The mind can taint an experience. It really can. And I honestly, I think my mind's been doing it my whole life. And I think perhaps many minds, if not most, if not all minds, will tend to do this. And maybe there's even a development of the mind and being able to truly enjoy life. It's hope I figure it out one day. So yeah, that's kind of the prayer, people, is to try to practice enjoying life, whatever's coming at you. Try. It's definitely not easy, especially for certain situations. It can be very hard. Sand in the toes too. That's a good one. It's good to have you, Philip. Thanks for being here. Nathaniel, kids bring out this sense of experiencing it all again with new eyes. Yeah, you're completely right. Becoming a father, really, the kids have taught me very much. Enjoy the time with them. Apples are mind altering in the right context. Exactly. So like every breath, like it can be ecstatic. Every breath can be ecstatic. So I say that because I just did it. It like you can do it, and chill bumps can rise over your skin. So y'all have a good one. Thank you for your time and attention. Think about where you give your attention. All right. Bye-bye. Peace.